I moved into my first house at 31. Not an apartment, a house with a yard and a crawl space and a furnace I didn't fully understand and a set of gutters that needed clearing every autumn. The kind of adult responsibilities I'd spent my 20s avoiding. I was proud of it, in that quiet way you're proud of things you don't talk about much. It was a small place at the end of a residential street in a town I'd chosen mostly for the price. 2 bedrooms, one of which I used as a home office. Old oak floors that announced every step. A kitchen that faced the backyard, mostly fence and overgrown grass, and a living room window that looked out onto the street. I worked from home. That matters for the context of what I'm about to tell you, because it meant I knew that house during the day as well as most people know their homes at night. I knew its sounds. I knew when the refrigerator cycled. I knew the specific creak of the 3rd stair. I knew the way the afternoon light moved through the kitchen and what the house sounded like when the wind came from the east versus the west. That's why the first morning it happened, I didn't ignore it. I came downstairs at 7, the way I always did. Made coffee, the way I always did. Sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Completely routine. But about an hour into work, I noticed the smell. Coffee. But not my coffee. Mine was still in the mug beside me, still warm. This was coming from somewhere else in the house. Older. The particular bitter smell of coffee that has been sitting on heat too long. The kind that clings to the air and to cabinet doors. I walked through the ground floor slowly. The living room, the small dining space I never used, the hallway. The smell was strongest near the hallway closet, which struck me as odd because the hallway closet held coats and a vacuum cleaner, not appliances. I opened it and looked inside. Coats, vacuum cleaner, the smell hanging in the air of the closet as if it had been shut in with something. I told my neighbor about it that evening, the older man next door who'd lived on the street for decades. He asked if I'd had anyone over. I hadn't. He said old houses hold smells from previous occupants sometimes, in the walls, in the wood. He seemed unbothered by it, and I let myself take that as a reasonable answer. 2 weeks passed, nothing else happened, and I forgot about it. Then, one Tuesday morning, I came downstairs, and the hallway closet was open. Not wide open, just ajar, 6 inches, maybe 8, the door resting against the frame without clicking shut. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at it for a moment. I was certain I hadn't opened it the night before. I used that closet maybe once a week to get my coat, and I had a clear memory of the last time I'd reached in there 2 days prior and pushed the door shut behind me. I'm methodical like that. It's part of my personality that sometimes frustrates people and occasionally serves me well. I closed it and went to work. The following Tuesday, same day of the week, which I only registered later, I came downstairs and the closet was open again. Same angle, 6 to 8 inches, as if someone had left it that way deliberately, or as if someone had been inside it and the door had drifted. I started testing the latch. It was firm, no looseness, no tendency to swing on its own. When I pushed it closed, it stayed closed. I told myself I was tracking something that wasn't a pattern. 2 incidents 2 weeks apart was coincidence, made meaningful by anxiety. I was new to living alone in a house. I was adjusting. That was the rational framework, and I applied it carefully. On the 3rd Tuesday, I came downstairs to a closed closet and the smell of old coffee, stronger than it had ever been, filling the entire hallway. And sitting on the hallway floor, Directly in front of the closet door was a single ceramic mug I didn't own. Dark blue, thick-handled, not chipped, not dirty, clean, or clean enough to have been recently washed. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it for a long time. There was no coffee in it. There was no residue, but the smell in the hallway was unmistakable. I called a locksmith that afternoon to check all my entry points. He found that the back door lock, a deadbolt I believed to be fully functional, had a worn cylinder that could be turned with a similar key from the same manufacturer's older line. Not a common vulnerability, he told me, but not unheard of in houses of that age. He replaced the locks. I reported the mug to the non-emergency line and kept it bagged in my garage in case anything else happened and context became important. Nothing else happened, but I've never found an explanation for the mug. The previous owner of the house had moved out of state. I had no record of any visitors in that period. No one I knew owned a mug that matched that description. It sat in that bag in my garage for 2 years before I moved. I left it behind when I went. This one is harder to tell because it involves admitting how long I rationalized what was in front of me. I lived alone in a ground floor flat for about 3 years, part of a converted older building with 4 units, shared hallways, and a communal laundry room in the basement. Neighbors came and went. It was the kind of building where you learn to recognize footsteps overhead without ever learning the person's name. I had a video doorbell, one of those standard models you set up in an afternoon and mostly forget about unless a package gets delivered. It sent clips to my phone when motion was detected at the door. I checked it occasionally, never obsessively. About 18 months into living there, I started getting motion clips at night. Not from the front door, from the internal hallway camera I'd added after a package went missing from the communal entrance. This camera faced the shared hallway outside my flat door, and it saved motion clips to a local drive. The first clip was from 1:40 a.m. on a Wednesday, motion detected. The clip showed the hallway, empty, no one there. I assumed a cat, a draft moving something, a moth triggering the sensor. I deleted it. The second clip came 9 days later, same time almost exactly, 1:43 a.m. Hallway, empty. The third clip, 11 days after that, showed the hallway again, empty again, except that in this clip, and I watched it several times to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing, my flat door was slightly different at the end of the clip than at the beginning. The gap at the bottom between door and floor, where hallway light would show through, was narrower at the end of the 15-second clip than at the start, as if the door had been pushed very slightly from the outside and then returned. I sat with that clip for a long time. I adjusted my camera angle and added a second lock, a chain I fixed to the door every night before bed. I started checking the clips every morning instead of occasionally. For 3 weeks, nothing. The hallway stayed empty and still. I began to feel the particular embarrassment of someone who has overreacted, who has turned a technical glitch into a personal threat. I almost took the second lock off. Then I came home from a weekend away to find my flat exactly as I'd left it, except for one detail. On my kitchen counter, a drawer, the one that held spare keys, batteries, that kind of thing, was open. Just the one drawer. Everything else was closed. I checked the spare keys immediately, all present, nothing missing, nothing added. I reported it to the building manager. She was sympathetic but practical. No other tenants had reported anything,
no sign of forced entry, and the building's front door had an electronic key fob system that logged entries. She pulled the log. Between my departure Friday evening and my return Sunday afternoon, the only entry recorded was a Sunday morning visit from a maintenance contractor she confirmed was legitimate. But fob logs only tracked the building's front entrance. The individual flat doors were mechanical locks, old ones. An officer who responded to my eventual report, I filed one after the drawer once I had the full picture assembled, told me that worn lock cylinders in older buildings were a more common access point than most people realized, that a previous tenant could retain a working copy of an older key, that there wasn't always visible evidence of entry. They found nothing conclusive. The case stayed open for a while and then went quiet, the way those things do. What I haven't mentioned yet, and what I've mostly kept to myself, is what was on the last clip the camera captured 3 days before I found the open drawer, while I was still at home and believed myself to be alone. 1:38 a.m., the hallway, empty. But at the very end of the clip, at the edge of the frame near the building's basement stairwell door, a shape moved. Not clearly, not in a way I could point to as definitive, but the shape was the right height, the right proportion, and it moved with the particular slow patience of something that was used to waiting. I moved out at the end of that lease, and I did not renew. The last one I'll tell you is the shortest, and it's the one that changed how I think about privacy in a way I've never quite recovered from. I was house-sitting for a friend, 3 weeks in a narrow 2-story on a quiet inland road, well outside any town center. She'd gone overseas for work. I was between places, between jobs, genuinely grateful for the arrangement. It was a comfortable house, warm, well-stocked, with a dog named Archer, who slept at the foot of my bed and gave the place a sense of company. The house had a detached garage at the end of a long driveway, and behind the garage, just barely visible from the kitchen window if you looked at the right angle, a small storage shed. My friend had mentioned neither structure in any way that suggested I needed to pay attention to them. They simply existed at the edge of the property the way outbuildings do. Archer started behaving differently around day 5. He was a calm dog, older, unhurried, with no history of anxiety that my friend had mentioned. But on the 5th evening, he began sitting in the kitchen and staring toward the back window. Not barking, not growling, just sitting, fully upright, ears raised, staring at the window that faced the garage and shed. I looked out. The driveway was empty. The garage was closed. The shed was shut. The yard was still in the evening light. I assumed a rabbit or a fox. Archer had preferences about yard wildlife that I wasn't fully aware of. I fed him and went back to whatever I was doing. By the 2nd week, it had become a nightly occurrence. Same time, roughly, between 8 and 9 in the evening, Archer would position himself in the kitchen, facing the back window, and remain there for 20 to 30 minutes before eventually settling. I started looking out the window during these episodes, systematically, scanning the yard. I saw nothing. On the 14th evening, I looked out during one of Archer's vigils and noticed the shed curtain. It was a small window on the shed's front face, a single pane with a thin curtain behind it, the kind of curtain that's just decorative or functional in the loosest sense. I'd looked at that shed window probably a dozen times. The curtain had always hung straight. That evening, it was gathered to one side, as if someone behind it had moved it to look out and hadn't quite let it fall back into place. The shed was padlocked. I went to the back door and stood there in the cold, looking down the driveway for a long time.
Archer sat beside me, not moving. The curtain stayed gathered to one side. I called my friend. She answered, time zone groggy, and asked what was wrong. I described what I was seeing. There was a pause. Then she told me she used to let someone use the shed for storage, a man she'd known through a previous neighbor. She'd told him the arrangement was over before she left, but she said it without the full confidence the sentence deserved. She didn't have a number for him. She couldn't remember his last name. She remembered that he'd had a key for the shed padlock. I took Archer to a friend's house that night and called the non-emergency line from there. Officers checked the property. They found the shed empty of any person, but they found inside it a folding chair positioned directly in front of the window, facing the house. They couldn't determine how long it had been there. My friend, when she heard, was horrified in the way people are when they realize a kindness they extended without thinking has become something else. The previous arrangement, she thought, had lasted less than a year. She thought it had ended cleanly. I stayed at my friend's place until my own situation was sorted. Archer adjusted fine. But I still think about those evenings would have looked like from the other direction. Lights on in the kitchen, a person moving through the rooms, a dog sitting in the window, someone in a folding chair, watching all of it.